O3C is a podcast series where myself and two of my very best gaming chums have been counting down our top 100 favourite video games of all time. Our lists are as eclectic as they come, but there are of course some games that will inevitably feature on all three of our lists. When this glorious moment of unification happens, we will produce one of these videos where we combine all three of our contributions from the podcast for a game that has officially been our 3 cents approved. So, moving on to the rankings, starting this week, we have My Game.
Ooh.
My Game is a game on the Nintendo 3DS.
Ooh, it's exciting.
Good little system, isn't it?
It is a game that was recommended to me, funnily enough, by a certain Mr. Dow.
Oh.
I know. Your father rang me and said, no. No, you told me. You said, you need to get this. It's your favourite game.
I know what this is.
And obviously we can deduce from this being episode 26 that was woefully incorrect. But it was still a great game that I enjoyed nonetheless. That game was, of course, Fantasy Life.
Fantasy Life? Brilliant.
Yeah, it was a game that I played and then told Minty, you need to play this. It's your favourite game.
And I did play it.
And we will see.
It could be.
I mean, Fantasy Life is essentially, it feels like it's about 100 games in one because it is a hybrid of all the different types of RPG and all the different types of sim game you could possibly find. And so the premise is there's a massive fantasy world full of fantasy things, magic and dragons and whatever. And you get to choose which career you adopt, what life you want to lead. And then there is a huge quest depending on that career, and you can also switch to different careers at any point and carry on with those quests on a very different thing, and eventually you can take on all the careers you want and explore all the different corners of this world through these various different vocations. So for example, if you're in the mood to play a Zelda game, then you could adopt the Paladin job. Or if you wanted to play, say, Final Fantasy, you could adopt the Mercenary job.
Ooh.
Or if you wanted to play Harvest Moon, you could be a farmer. Or if you wanted to play Legend of the River King, you could be an angler. Or if you wanted to be a child, you could be a miner.
Hey!
You don't even like this game, you just wanted to make that joke.
Entirely. But there were loads of different lives you could choose from, obviously from those ones I've just mentioned, but also you could be such things as a woodworker, or a haberdasherer, or a food preparator, an entrepreneur, a doorman, a wrangler, a butcher, a baker, a flat pack curator, a mystic fiddler, a goat, a sneak thief, a rustic gobshite, an inventor, a visionary, or most importantly, you could be true to yourself. So yeah, but it's a proper open world game. So like I said, you can interchange which career, which quest you're kind of pursuing at any point, but you can go right to the hardest part of the world at any point in the game. You'll be killed very swiftly, but quite nicely, right outside the kind of the starting city where you are, there is an enormous dragon, and you can run away from him, it's fine. But inevitably, the first time you see him, you'll be like, awesome, let's give this guy a run for his money. You're dead. You're dead before you even decide what you're going to do. But then every 10 hours into the game, I think, actually, you know what? I wonder, there was that dragon early doors. Let's go and give him another go. You die again. But eventually, you would get hard enough to defeat the dragon, and, you'd slowly work up and explore all the different areas of the world, which was lovely. I found it quite interesting, the fact that every quest line that you had somehow ended up with you having to save the world through your various chosen means, which was fair enough. Like if you were a sorcerer or the magician, I think it was called, and obviously you'd have to defeat some evil wizard. But then if you were the chef, I don't know, had to cook a good egg.
The best egg.
And then maybe you would satiate the hunger of the evil Leviathan that was going to devour the princess. I don't know. I can't remember. Ultimately, the game wasn't quite as open-ended as you would initially believe, because it did basically all the quests ended up falling into, one of two things. Either you were crafting something or you were fighting something, and you would go and find a monster and kill the monster, get the bounty, bring it back, or you'd, have to level up your crafting skill enough to make a certain dish or weapon. But even though, that variety wasn't there as much as perhaps, we would have liked, it was still really nice. It was really satisfying.
Yeah.
And, it was very clear what you were doing. There wasn't massive confusion if you're like, oh, hang on, am I a paladin right now, or am I a chef? I don't know. I've killed an orange. And it was very clear what you were doing, which job you were currently pursuing, what your next quest was, what your next mission was. So it made it quite easy and quite satisfying to kind of progress through the game and just really enjoy the world. Just really enjoy the world. It was very lovely. Obviously, the game was made by Level 5, who have done other games such as Professor Layton and
Ni no Kuni.
And Ni no Kuni. And so it did have that wonderful kind of Studio Ghibli-esque animation style to it, with some of the cutscenes, and the in-game graphics were just wonderful. It was thoroughly adorable. My enduring memory of playing it was, I remember getting it just before I went to Zambia for 3 weeks. And I brought it with me, and I played a lot more of it than I thought I was going to. You could probably be a bit critical of me, thinking, okay, you went to Africa and you just sat and played on your 3DS. Yes, but
Correct.
the temperatures in the daytime were so high that basically I just had to sit as still as possible, so I generated as little energy as possible, on the fear that I might, sort of creep up a degree and combust. It was just, so I basically just had to sit with a fan on, with an open window, and just kill a load of slime monsters. There was a sequel, and there is a sequel.
It's a mobile game, isn't it?
Yeah, so far it's only out in Japan, but then the original Fantasy Life took, I think it was 2 years to be translated and whatever, and brought over to here. So I think that the mobile game only ended up coming out last year, so we might see it at some point. I have no idea whether or not it's gone that same horrendous route of Animal Crossing. But it would, I think it would work well with that sort of pick up and play style. I think that would work quite well. But it was a lovely game. I mean, if you're going to have such a broad title as Fantasy Life, you do need to have a lot of content in there, and it did. It really did.
Yeah.
I would love it if a new one was in development for the Switch. I think we'd have a great time.
Where could they go, though?
Fantasy Lives.
More extra lives. I mean, what I really liked about the 3DS game was it knew it was a handheld game.
Yes.
So none of the quests you did were ever like, well, this is going to take you 3 hours to do.
Yeah.
Even when it was like defeat something tough or defeat a certain amount of something or collect a certain amount of something, they were still like bite-sized little chunks.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's a lot of content to it. Like it's a huge game if you're really going to sort of like try and prestige or get the top rank of each life kind of thing.
Which I did, including the DLC.
Did you do every one? I think I got to about half.
Everyone.
Yes, I did too.
Yeah, Minty did as well.
Yeah.
Of course you did. Of course you did.
I picked it back up a couple of weeks ago. For all we said about pick up and play ability, I was like, well, I've just picked this up. I don't actually know what to do now. And then I realised that I had completed it 100%.
There was nothing to do.
There was nothing left to do.
There's nothing left to
literally.
do. I mean, I definitely went over 100 hours, definitely. Because there was also, after you'd done triple starred a career, then there was also a ridiculously hard end quest and boss for each one that was, very tough. I remember, was there some sort of spooky pumpkin boss?
Maybe.
Or an evil carrot?
Oh.
I remember that gave me some difficulty.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
I really hope it was in the game, because at some point a big old carrot has caused me some serious issues.
You thinking of Cuphead?
Oh mate, I'd never think of Cuphead.
Is it just on the pile, on the bin pile?
That's mainly why I ended up buying more games on the eShop this last week, is just to kind of just shunt it off my home screen.
Just into the pile of shame and just off at the end.
Yeah, so there it is. A very fondly remembered game. I probably would play a sequel, but yeah, like you said, I'm not sure where they could go with it, but then I don't know if I'd mind.
Just more.
I think I'd probably play the game again.
Just more of it.
Yeah, just more, different careers.
Shinier. You could be a farrier. They do horses' hooves, don't they? Mm-hmm. You could be
Sommelier.
Oh, yeah.
What's that?
Yeah. A wine taster.
A wine taster.
Oh, okay.
You could be a cicerone.
You could be a trichologist.
What's that?
It's a hair scientist.
Hair scientist, isn't it?
You could be a phlebotomist.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You could be...
Anything that you want it to be. So there we are. My 77th favourite video game is a fantasy life. So, moving on, finally, we have Chris.
Hello.
What is your 76th favourite video game?
This is a game that all of us enjoy. I know that because we talked about it last week when you brought up Fantasy Life, because my 76th favourite video game is Fantasy Life. 1 week within yours.
Oh, wow.
How about that? Wow. That's nuts.
When you were talking about it, as soon as you started describing it, I was looking at my list at the same time, so I normally have it up in the background.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, this is weird. And I found it really strange that, you know, it's a game that, like you mentioned, I recommended to you initially.
Yeah.
You recommended on to Minty.
And I recommended it back onto you.
Yeah, it's come all the way back round, but it's fallen within one number of me and your list, Jonathan, and I'm reasonably sure it'll be on Minty's somewhere. Oh. Either way, it's a game we've all enjoyed and played for a good amount of time. I think we can certainly say that. And it's a game that I beat when I was playing it. I'm doing kind of inverted air commas here because I know that you two rinsed it within a point of like wearing a hole through the cartridge. Whereas for me, I beat 3 or maybe 4 of the lifestyle pathways. I got through the main story. I did the DLC story. I had a go at all the other sort of job choices as well. But what I really loved about it is that it's a game I used to lose like several hours at a time to at the height of playing.
Yeah.
And it's rare that I do that with games. Like even when I'm really into something, I don't generally have these massive sessions. And checking in the last week on my 3DS, it said my average session time for this game was 5 hours.
Wow.
Oh, boy.
That's a big chunk of time to sit down and commit consistently enough to be in your little like ranking thing for the console. And knowing that when it came out, I was working a full-time job in real life as well as my jobs in Fantasy Life. So whatever it was about this game, I felt really committed to just driving through the checklist and kind of just being in it, as it were. And I mean, there's no point going over like the story or the mechanics or anything because you did that last week, you know, eloquently, if a little sleep deprived.
I don't even remember.
Exactly. Instead, I tried to work out what I enjoyed about it so much personally. And I think a big part of it is that I mentioned last time, it being a really good mobile game, as in like a handheld game that you take with you, because the tasks are bite-sized, they're really simple. It's got a really clear sense of progression, not just because it's got like a massive task list that you're essentially ticking things off, but because like the way you mentioned that it's got these like enemies like the dragon outside the main city or other kind of creatures across the world that you know you're not strong enough to beat at certain times, but you keep sort of chipping away at. So you kind of see this idea that it's like an indicator of your growing abilities or power or gear or whatever you've upgraded. And it's just really accessible. Like it's a game that I think almost anyone could pick up and get into quite quickly. And it brings together threads of games that I think we've all enjoyed, like having talked about in the past, like Harvest Moon. There's elements of Animal Crossing, there's elements of like top-down action RPGs like Legend of Zelda, and the way that the world is set out, there's almost elements of like freeform Western RPGs like Skyrim and other kind of Bethesda games.
Yeah.
But most of all, like having thought about all this stuff, the crux of what really does it for me, like why I enjoy this game so much, is because it is repetitive, and it's more repetitive than it is sort of deep. But I find like a real comfort to that, and I think that's what contributes to playing it for hours at a time.
Yeah.
It's like, I think there's a comfort in the world itself in the game being just big enough to feel expansive, whilst also being small enough to be completely navigable without a map necessarily. You know what goes where.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real fine line to that in games, like having things that are recognisable, having routes that you can kind of memorise, so you feel like you are living through this place. You've got kind of an idea of what's there. And with everything in the game, there's just enough variety in enemy types. There's just enough variety in kind of ingredients or crafting materials, whichever things you need for your lifestyle choices. But it meant that you could probably become quite au fait in whatever career path you chose. So you got really into it without being overwhelmed by it. And a huge amount of games now I pick up and I'm put off really early because it's like, this is too big for me to play consistently enough to manage it.
Absolutely.
That it's just as you get older, you have less time to sort of sit down and play a game for 5 hours. But games pop up, and within the first couple of hours, if I haven't been taught everything I need to know, then I'm never going to remember it. and stuff like Xenoblade, they're amazing games, and I loved playing Xenoblade Chronicles on the 3DS and Xenoblade Chronicles X. But they're too big. They are too big in terms of like the map, in terms of the stuff you have to recall, in terms of like the systems in play and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's a real commitment.
Yeah, for Fantasy Life, looking back, like I've read reviews and I've watched people talk about it that criticise basically all these points as negatives. But for me, it was a game that was exactly big enough and engaging enough to be something I really, really loved playing. So yeah, it's I don't know, maybe it is like quite a vanilla release, but it's one that we all managed to put in hundreds of hours into by the sounds of it.
Yeah. I mean, I often find that with games like those pick up and play games that are designed for you to play in short bursts, they're the ones that I will play non-stop.
Yeah. I mean,
Really
Dead Cells
invest
is a
in
case
it.
in point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
there's
like,
obviously a lot to it, but it's something that the essence of Dead Cells is quite simple, and you've put 10 million runs into it now.
Finally, we have Minty Booth.
It's me.
Minty, can you tell us what your 75th favourite video game is, please?
Yeah, I can. My 75th video game is one that has already appeared on our lists.
Is it?
It is, yes. Now, for me, this game really scratched a lovely itch. So many games have you completing a vast quest, facing off against bigger and bigger enemies until someone who is no more physically developed by the time they started taking down somebody 2 stories taller than them. That whole idea of just going on this great big life-changing saga of an adventure. So many people have done it, and this game was so refreshing because it was just basically wall-to-wall side quests. There was a little bit of a main story, but it didn't really need sort of the main story, because the joy of this game was the journey that you went on and the friends you made along the way. Would you believe it? My 75th favourite video game is Fantasy Life.
No flipping way.
Yeah?
That's absurd.
It's wild, yeah.
That is absurd. I was thinking that when you were describing it. I was like, it can't be.
What can I bring to the table to talk about this game, which hasn't already been spoken about? I'll just tell you how I started playing it. I started off as a carpenter.
Ah, Jesus.
Yep. With blue hair and like a little mouth that's like a 3.
They left that bit out of the gospel.
It didn't have any pictures, the Bible, did it? Unless you were like under 5. Yeah, started off as a carpenter, which I quickly regretted because I didn't really have any woodcutting skills. So I swapped to a woodcutter, which I then regretted because I didn't have any combat skills. And that's one of the things that I really loved about it, because even though I was sort of chopping and changing between all the jobs, that's kind of the point. So even though I'm like, oh, well, I'm just cutting down this oak tree, and now I can't cut down this pine tree because my axe isn't good enough, well, I'll just have to become a carpenter and make myself a better axe. Oh, but I can't because I don't have any metal. So I'll have to swap to a miner quickly, get some ore to make the better axe. I can chop down the trees for better wood. And while I'm here, I'm starting to get attacked by ghosts. So I'll have to level up with my magic wand a bit as a mage, so I can hold my own. And slowly but surely, you're sort of not only just becoming a good carpenter, but you're building a well-rounded life in this fantasy world. For a game that is just sort of disparate side quests with you, fry an egg, give it to Gramps.
Granny Rags.
Granny Rags and tattered Gramps. And then you fried egg for their rheumatism. Oh, and there was Jinx the cat, who...
Yes.
I tell you what, Jinx the cat and the leader of the Hunters Guild, that was my go-to team for when I got to sort of like the end game dungeons, because they just turned everything to leather. Everything into leather.
And then you could use that if you were
and then you could use
tailor.
that as a tailor to create fashionable jerkins. It was just a collection of side quests, which was so much more than the sum of its parts. Loved the art style, loved the music. It really did feel like just a really lovely, fleshed out world. And it's the only reason I've still got my 3DS. You don't need a big boss or a world-ending event that you need to avert to have a nice time.
You just need a well-rounded life.
Yes, yeah.
And to know who you are.
And I was a little blue-haired boy with a bandana
And a dream.
and a dream.